Hey guys, I'm back. So happy Motivational Mommy Monday. I'm still in my exercise room, right? I kind of stay in here a lot. Well, okay, the topic that I want to talk to you about today, I got my notes and everything ready. Well, sort of. They got not like chicken scratch, but the topic I want to talk to you today about is gleaning. Have you ever heard of gleaning? Well, today I want to talk to you about gleaning, really the blessing of gleaning. Well, I looked it up on Google, and Google had gleaning as a farmhand or a collector of small things. But the gleaning that I want to talk to you today about is gleaning from the Bible. Well, bear with me because I'm kind of looking at my notes too. The gleaning from the Bible that I'm talking about is the gleaning from Bible times. It was to collect something after a harvest, or to it was what they kind of used for charity. Like people would go behind after a harvest or a big collection, and they would use it as charity, and the people would collect it so that they could provide for their families. So that's what they would do it for gleaning. So for someone to glean, they would usually have like these characteristics of humility, perseverance, and then they would also have boldness. These were very useful characteristics if you were a gleaner. So the Bible uses, it gives us a lot of excellent examples. But one of the examples that'll probably stand out to you the most would probably be Ruth. Now, if you remember the story of Ruth, a lot of people remember the story of Ruth, but they remember the story of Ruth and Boaz. Well, the story of Ruth and Boaz is actually a very good example of gleaning and the blessing that actually followed. So, if you look in Ruth, I think it's Ruth 2:7, that's where it talks about gleaning itself. So, Ruth would have never met Boaz if she wasn't actually gleaning, because she was actually gleaning in his land. So, when Ruth was gleaning in his land, there's a couple of things that I'm not sure if you know about the story. So, did you know that Ruth was hated by the people who were on the land, the people, the inhabitants of the land? So when Ruth would go to glean at this land, they just hated her because Ruth was not one of their people. Remember, Ruth came there with Naomi, who was her mother-in-law. So before Ruth was one of them, she was like a person who served another god, and she was like despised. So Ruth had to deal with that. So you have to think about this. Ruth had to have humility because she had to ask Boaz, could she glean on this land. So that took humility, right? And then she had to have boldness because she had to ask. And then she had to have perseverance because she had to go onto a land and get food for her mother-in-law, and go face these people every day that could not stand her, right? So that was the three qualities, right? So another thing is, did she engage? No, Ruth went and she was about her business. And then it even went so far, if you kind of like go further into the story and more study of it, there was, it even showed like there was a point where they even tried to accuse her of serving a false god in front of her boo, which was Boaz, we all know. You know, because people, when you got something, they be trying to like get, all up in your business. But anyway, what did Ruth do? Did Ruth engage? No. Ruth stood up for who was now her God, who was Jehovah. She stood up for Jehovah, but she stood up for herself too. But did she like flip the script and go crazy? No, Ruth didn't do that. Ruth was calm and cool. She kept her composure. She stood up for herself, and she stood up for God and showed him to be the one who was actually the false God server. Isn't that something? It's always usually like that. Usually the case. So you got to keep your cool. You could be a critical thinker without having a critical heart, a critical tongue, and a critical spirit. So keep that in mind. So that's something I'm learning. Keep your cool. So anyway, okay, back to the story. So Ruth showed the characteristics: perseverance, humility, and boldness. So that right there was why she got the blessing. But also, you had to take into account she was doing this for survival for her mother-in-law. It was very important. She really didn't have other options, and we find this a lot, through the Bible, but she was being obedient. So she also had, although she had to go out and deal with these crazy people all the time, she got to go back to the sanity of her mother-in-law, who of course, was a good Christian and was a good source of strength for her, I'm sure. So when probably she had to deal with all this opposition, she could go back and she could use those, probably while she was out, she could go back in her mind and use those words as a source of encouragement, and sort through those and pull out those little words as a source of encouragement, and use those almost like as a spiritual gleaning. So we know pretty much the story of Ruth and how it ends and stuff. It's a riveting story, so if you want to go back and read it, she got a whole section of it. So go back and read that story if you'd like to. It's a riveting story, but you have to take into account Ruth did this not for Boaz, but she did it for Jehovah. She did it for herself, and she did it out of obedience. So she was blessed, of course. But maybe there's no fields where you are. Believe it or not, gleaning still goes on. But maybe there's no fields where you are or where you live. So how can you apply this to yourself? Or how can we apply this to our everyday life? Well, it made me think, right? But like Ruth, we still live in somewhat hostile territory, Like maybe you go to work in a hostile territory where, everybody is against you, and, you still have to provide for your family. You can't just stop going there. And, I feel like I live in hostile territory. Like, I don't want to go outside at all. I just want to stay in the house and take a nap. But that's just the introvert in me. I can't do that. I have a family. The chicken ain't going to just come to the door, even as many hookups as I have on the internet. So I have to go out, So this is just something that we have to do. So you just have to go out and you have to be about your business, and you have to take encouragement from stories like this and from the Bible, and just be about your business. We have to be peaceable. We have to find encouragement, and we always have to be ready to make a defense for the Lord, and just always be ready to make a defense for our God. But I have more notes. Now, we may not receive much encouragement, but when we go to church, that's when or when we get with our fellow believers, that's what it says in Hebrews, to incite to love and find works and be together. Listen to those sermons. See what you can learn. So just like, with gleaning, maybe you don't do a physical glean, but maybe you could do a spiritual glean. Listen to those stories, because just like with the story of Ruth, how, I can pull out little things that maybe you didn't know. Listen to those sermons and see if it's things that you can pull out that you didn't know. Find a way to be blessed. Always be ready to glean something, just like at church this week. My pastor, I go to Prayer Chapel in Upper Darby, so if you're looking for a good church in Upper Darby, come to Prayer Chapel. He gives excellent with names, and they're very nice. He gives excellent sermons, but he gave the sermon about the prodigal son. We've heard that probably a million times, you'd say, but I always listen because I'm always trying to glean something out of everything. So I feel like you can never learn enough. He talked about the prodigal son. Did you know that at the time of what was going on with the prodigal son, it was their law that if a child was rebellious, you can stone them to death? So this may have played into why the dad, when he saw the son like afar off, he went running to him and saying that my son has come home, so that the townspeople would not stone the boy to death, because he wanted them to know that me and him is all right. So don't stone my child, because I have forgiven him. And that's why, he may have go and run into him. I love stuff like that, because we didn't know what the laws were then. So we really don't know. But I just love knowing little intricacies of how they lived and different things like that. So I hope that you enjoyed our Motivational Mommy Monday. And if you had something happen in church that you gleaned, please tell me, because I love the exchange of encouragement. So until next week, bye bye.